When you're an innovative business, every blank page is an opportunity. What will you do with it? Will you make something better or create something new? Dell's Technologies Advisors provide you with the tools and expertise to do incredible things because we believe there's an innovator in all of us. To do more with smart tech, find your Dell Technologies Advisor at dell.co.uk/smallbiz. It's the week ending Saturday the 2nd of July, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the UK pledging an extra £1 billion of military aid in support of Ukraine, the sentencing of sex offenders Ghislaine Maxwell and R. Kelly to 20 and 30 years, respectively, and the death of cancer campaigner and broadcaster Dame Deborah James at the age of 40. But we're here to bring you some of the stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news, not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann. Let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team, we have Kate Samuelson from football news site Goal. It's Emma Smith. And from the immigration podcast Integrate That, it's Abdulwahab Tahhan. And Emma, you are kicking us off today. Football pun. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week, the UK looked to move a step closer to banning trans women from elite sport.
The reason that these sports are looking closely at this follows the emergence of trans athletes like Leah Thomas in swimming and the British trans female cyclist Emily Bridges, although it has to be said they're very, very few in numbers. But it's also because the International Olympic Committee's latest guidance basically encourages all sports federations to come up with their own transgender rules based on the nature of their disciplines, while taking into consideration the importance of inclusion. While rugby decides to go in one direction by banning trans females in women's sport, equestrian might well choose a different path. And as you say, it's very, very contentious. FINA's decision was branded as cruel and unnecessary by supporters of the transgender community. On the other side, it's been hailed as a victory for the protection of female sport.
Alex Capstick, sports correspondent for the BBC, reporting for the Jeremy Vine Show on Radio 2. So, okay, Emma, we are talking about the ban of trans athletes in elite swimming. I don't know if that counts as massively under the radar as a story, but I will allow it from you because you are an amateur athlete and a sports reporter and a trans woman. So you're well placed to tell us what happened this week.
So this week, UK Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries called on various UK sports governing bodies to follow policy that competitive women's sport must be reserved for those born of female sex. This follows on from, as that clip, and as you mentioned, Olly, FINA, which is the world governing body responsible for aquatic sports, swimming, diving, water polo, etc., banned trans women athletes who've been through male puberty. The same week, IRL, which is the International Rugby League, did the same for elite level athletes, citing perceived risk to women's safety. So this is obviously a contentious issue in sport, which has been moved on quite significantly in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, moved on significantly. Why? I mean, it's not a new issue, is it? There have been policies on this for 20 years.
Yeah, while this has sort of become a much more prevalent sort of topic in mainstream news media in the last year or so, trans athletes being able to compete in their lived gender at elite level is not a new thing. They've been able to compete since the 2004 Olympics. The first rules were put in place, although it wasn't until 2021 in Tokyo when the first out trans athlete qualified for the Olympics, Laurel Hubbard, in the weightlifting. But basically, that's sort of like the fact that trans athletes are now sort of, there have been the first sort of instances of trans athletes having sort of elite level of success. Laurel Hubbard qualifying for the Olympics, Leah Thomas winning an event in the US Collegiate Championships. It seems to have pushed these governing bodies into making these into sort of reassessing their rules, and in the case of the UK, the Culture Secretary making this intervention.
Yes, because Leah Thomas had said, hadn't she, that she was preparing to participate in the next Olympics for the United States at swimming. Do you think that's what kind of pushed them into a decision on this? The spectre of the idea that they could have a gold-winning female athlete who was actually born into a male gender?
Yeah, so it's basically effectively caused what I would call a bit of a moral panic. This is not something that's just in the rules and regulations. This is something that's happening in reality and has led to obviously hugely increased media coverage. A lot of it obviously quite negative.
And a lot of reaction as well, Kate, on social media. I mean, this is a big hot button issue, isn't it? What has the reaction been?
Yeah, I mean, there has been so much discussion about this. As you said, I'm not sure it's so much an under the radar story, but it's definitely a really interesting one and worth discussing today. We've seen in recent years globally a kind of huge interest in trans rights and huge diversity of opinion. And of course, social media is a place where we see that kind of encapsulates that the most. But as we heard in the clip, trans athletes I'm not sure about all of them, but a lot have spoken out and said that they think that these proposals are really unfair. The trans cyclist, Veronica Ivy, she said that it was an extreme indignity and an unethical non-starter, the concept of kind of not allowing trans women to compete against cis women and potentially having to compete in something that FINA has called open categories. But there's not much information yet about how exactly that will work.
Yeah, I mean, Abdul, it is unquestionably unfair on trans athletes, but the fiendishly difficult decision that FINA are trying to arbitrate upon is how you make it fair for biologically born women if you have people entering in their category who they say they have scientific proof are physically stronger than everyone else in the category. That gives trans women a physical advantage. It's unfair to all the other women competing unless they make this decision.
Well, yeah, there's an issue here between fairness and inclusion. So these two are not the same. So, for example, we all know that there are differences between men and women. For example, in 2016, the average height of an Olympian finalist in the swimming for women was 5.9 inches, which is 175 centimeter, while for men it was 6.2, which is 188. And that's just for swimming. If you look at the Tokyo Olympics, in order to qualify for the marathon, for men it was 2 hours 11 minutes, while for women it was 2 hours 14 minutes, something. So there are these differences. So you cannot really conflate inclusion with fairness. But the good thing about FINA is that they have proposed a solution that we haven't seen before, which is including a new category, which is for transgender athletes. As Kay said, we don't know the details of, but this is a good first step. But there are a lot of problems here. If I can just quickly say one problem, is that in order to get, for example, in England for the GB team or the swimming team, we have 48 swimmers. And these 48 swimmers come from a pool of a very large number of swimmers who compete in order to get a place. How many transgender athletes or how many transgender swimmers are there in order to open a category for them? Would there be like 10 from each country or 20 when the transgender community is not really a large community? I think it's less than 1% of the whole population in the UK.
Well, this is the issue, isn't it, Emma? Why arbitrate upon it at all when it is such a tiny minority? You know, yes, it does present an issue, obviously, when you have someone who identifies as female, who was born male, who has a physical advantage over other women in her category. But it doesn't happen very often. I mean, this solution of let's have trans sports seems like you're not going to get the standard of competition from entrants.
Yeah, I would just quickly like to pick up one thing, which is that the idea, obviously, Abdul is right that sort of between men and women there are differences in sort of the height and the times for qualification, but the fact is that the rules around trans participation don't just allow someone to self-identify in whatever category they prefer. There are rules and regulations around sort of hormonal level muscular changes between the amount of time between, after transitioning that you are able to compete in elite level sports. There are rules. It doesn't just allow sort of a male athlete to self-identify as a woman and then compete with females, and then which seems to have been what a lot of the panic has been about, but as the rules that I mentioned about, which have been in place since the 2004 Olympics, prevent that. So that being an issue that people are getting caught up on is a bit of a non-starter. To come back to the idea of the open categories, it's an idea that works in theory, but the fact is I don't think would really work in practice because, as you say, there are so few trans athletes, and the fact is, what would an open category look like in a FINA event? Would it be just Leah Thomas swimming up and down in a pool on her own? I mean, that you laugh, but the fact is that that's sort of what it would be like. What sort of numbers of competitors are you going to get? Where are you going to fit into the space in the calendar? Is there going to be enough interest from broadcasters or audiences? The fact is there isn't. And so basically, most events they're either not going to put these events on because it's simply not worth the time and effort, or they're going to be put on and they're going to be just a complete joke because it's going to be with minimal numbers of competitors.
But Emma, isn't it just true that you can't be fair to both groups? When you're trying to tackle with this issue, you can't be fair to women assigned female at birth and women assigned male at birth. Ultimately, you have to choose to be unfair to one of those groups of people when you're coming up with these rules to allow people to compete in a women's category. And so you can see why they might choose the group with fewer representatives to discriminate against. It's unpleasant to hear, but it's either that or discriminate against the majority of the women competing.
I think that the idea of having to discriminate against someone comes from the idea that there is an inherent difference between, between a transition sort of female, like trans female athlete and cis female athlete. The fact is, the medical research and sort of like the difference between post-transition female bodies, athletes, and cis is ongoing. But much of the research indicates that the level of the change in muscles and in sort of hormonal levels do sort of mean that there isn't a huge amount of difference sort of competitively between cis and trans female athletes. You shouldn't be comparing male and female. You should be comparing cis and trans, and there isn't a huge amount of difference. I mean, you look at Laurel Hubbard, who obviously is the only out trans female athlete to compete in the women's category in the Olympics, and she finished dead last. So the idea of there being some sort of inherent advantage that has to be discriminated against, I just don't think it has been borne out in terms of the actual evidence that we've seen.
I guess the other issue as well, Abdul, even if you support this in elite sport and say this is about dealing with a perception of unfairness, there's a danger that this gets implemented in amateur leagues and in school sports. You have a kid who identifies as a different gender, may not have transitioned because they're 12 or 13 years old, being told they can't play for the gendered team they want to. That isn't going to make any difference to global rankings, is it? That's just going to facilitate discrimination.
That's going to facilitate discrimination, and that's going to bring a lot of different issues in here about the age of transitioning. What if you're a child, and for example, because the policy says that the athlete has to transition before the age of 12. So what if you want to transition, but you don't have consent from your parents? What are you doing then? Then do you lose all, this is a life chance for you to or a dream to compete? So this is really complicated in here. And then what I've seen, there's an article in The Guardian by a previous Olympian who argued for this policy, and she says in it that there are a lot of people around in the UK who support transgender rights but don't want to compete against transgenders because they feel that there's an advantage for the transgender athletes. And I really feel for both of them, because at the end of the day, we want everyone to play sports, and we should include every minority. So if one minority suffers, then there's no justice in the whole community. So I really have no idea who to side with in this really difficult situation.
Well, finally on this, Emma, I mean, you follow this story very closely all the time. Some high-profile elite athletes are speaking out against, with FINA's decision, I guess Tom Daley was probably the highest profile person in swimming and diving to talk about it. Do you think the future could be boycotts of high-profile sporting events because of these sorts of positions on trans rights?
It's not beyond the realm of possibility. I mean, Tom Daley was very virulent in his criticism of the FINA ban, saying it's not on, and that he's furious that trans people won't get the chance to share their side, as he put it. So, boycotts and stuff like that are entirely possible. The thing is that the IOC has basically sort of washed its hands of making these decisions. It's very much a hands-off policy, which has allowed these individual governing bodies sort of the decision to make over this, which has led to different decisions from FINA, from cycling, from FIFA, World Athletics Company examining their policies, which means that it is become such a messy issue, and it is going to run, and as different sports governing bodies make their decisions, they may well make completely differing decisions, and that will lead to completely differing reactions from people who, depending on what side of this argument they fall on.
Okay. Kate, you're up next after this. When you're an innovative business, every blank page is an opportunity. What will you do with it? Will you make something better or create something new? Dell's Technologies Advisors provide you with the tools and expertise to do incredible things because we believe there's an innovator in all of us. To do more with smart tech, find your Dell Technologies Advisor at dell.co.uk/smallbiz. Okay, Kate, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is this the week we learned that we can sniff out our true friendships?
These researchers were wondering, and they have a long, long history of studying human body odor, this particular group. They were wondering, when people become fast friends, when they meet and it's like they've known each other forever and the friendship begins immediately, do those people happen to have more in common in terms of their odors? And I thought that was a fascinating question.
Veronique Greenwood there, reporting for the New York Times. Kate, what is this story?
So I just want to quickly say the irony of choosing this as my story when I've got a cold and have absolutely no sense of smell is not lost on me. But this week, the New York Times published a really interesting article, which was pegged to a recent study in the journal Science Advances, which was called There is Chemistry in Social Chemistry. The researchers, who were from the Weizmann Institute of Science in Israel, were interested in learning whether swift friendships, which is where people, quote unquote, click upon meeting, could be linked to similarities in their smells. And the results were really interesting.
Well, the results were they could, right? By 70% or so?
Yeah, so just to break down exactly how the study worked, they looked at same-sex, non-romantic pairs of friends who were aged between 22 and 39 who said their friendship clicked when they first met.
Yeah, so people that you've just met and straight away you feel you've got a bond with.
Exactly. So they asked these pairs of participants to do things like stop eating onions and garlic, stop using perfume and deodorant, all things that really affect someone's smell. And they provided them each with a 100% cotton t-shirt, which they had to wear on 2 consecutive nights for at least 6 hours. And they weren't allowed to have any other humans or pets in the bed with them when they slept during the testing period. And then the researchers used an electronic nose, which is called an e-nose. It's got these 10 metal oxide sensors to analyze the t-shirts, which were kept in Ziploc bags to kind of prevent them from taking in the smells of other environmental factors. And they also asked volunteer smellers to do the same thing. And the e-nose and these volunteer smellers analysed the similarities of these pairs of friends' t-shirts and found that the friends' odours were more similar to each other's than the strangers' odours.
Right, so regardless of lifestyle factors, because, you know, if they'd been eating garlic or if they'd been using the same washing powder or if they both had dogs or whatever, you could say that was the reason, subliminally, that they clicked. But actually they're saying, no, their natural odours were in synergy. That's right, yeah?
Yeah, that's exactly right. They also did another study as well, just to sort of back up this theory, where they got 132 strangers to play a mirroring game in pairs where they stood close enough to smell each other. And after taking part in this activity, they filled out a quiz about whether or not they felt a connection with their partner who they'd never met before. And fascinatingly, as the New York Times explained, the similarity of the pair's odours predicted whether both felt there had been a positive connection an astonishing 71% of the time, a finding which, as the piece says, implies that sniffing an odour similar to our own generates good feelings.
I mean, I can't help laughing at some of this, Abdul. It's partly because I suppose it's got details like, you know, not allowing your dog to sleep in the bed in preparation for the experiment and using a big electronic nose in a lab. It just seems amusing. But maybe that default reaction is wrong. Maybe the science of smell isn't taken seriously enough.
No, but if you look in the details, you see that all these participants were from Israel. So they were pretty much from the same country. And if you've been to the Middle East, you know we love falafel and hummus. And everyone who eats falafel and hummus is going to smell the same. And if you smell falafel and hummus, you're going to fall in love with the guy in front of you. Say, yeah, we're good friends. I mean, who doesn't love a plate of falafel and hummus? So there's one of the reasons that it might be that these people live in a approximately same lifestyle and close to each other.
Possibly, although that would suggest that peace in the Middle East could come a lot more straightforwardly if everyone who ate hummus and falafel was just nice to each other.
Yeah, the problem is everyone claims hummus and falafel is theirs, not the other culture. So this one on one hand an issue that it's mentioned in the study that these people were all from the same city, from the same country, and they live probably similar lifestyle. But one of the interesting things that I really thought of is how do you make friends when you're an adult? Because all these experiments were tested on people who are adults meeting other adults. So, but most of us have friends, very good friends when we were kids. Didn't really look at this, and then I started thinking of when you're in a new country, how do you make friends? How do you find people? It's most likely people who don't have a bad smell. So if you're not going to be friends with someone who's really smelly in the gym or in the pub.
Okay, you're not going to want to approach someone who stinks of BO. I mean, that's different, isn't it? That's a different experiment. But what this is saying, Emma, is that subliminally, we are considering people's smell in a way that we might be aware of considering someone's voice or someone's appearance when we meet them. But this animalistic sense is there in the background as well.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there is, the point of the study was it was between groups of friends or pairs of friends who said that they just clicked upon meeting, became friends straight away. And it's like, it does demonstrate how our subconscious plays a part in our friendship. You don't necessarily think about someone's scent, someone's smell, unless it's either particularly good or particularly bad. But the fact is, if it's something that sets off a good sense, a sort of a familiar sense within you, then you are going to be automatically more drawn towards that person. And I think the researchers are right in that, importance of smell, it's often overlooked compared to sort of sight and sound, and it does show how important that, smell is to a first impression.
But also the criteria that you outlined, Kate, same-sex pairs of people who weren't sexually attracted to each other, just friends, that suggests that we look for friends who are like us fundamentally, whereas I kind of think a lot of my friends are very different to me. That's why I find them interesting.
Yeah, I suppose the study might suggest that you can smell like someone but have different traits, and traits and smells don't have anything in common, perhaps. But what I thought was interesting was we kind of have known for a while that smell forms a strong part of a sexual attraction that you might have to someone.
Yeah, and that isn't laughed off, is it? As you say, that's established. There's a whole cologne industry built around that. And yet when it comes to friendship through smells, everyone's like, oh, ha, ha, how ridiculous.
Yeah, and I even, in my research for this story, discovered that there's a smell-based dating service which matches you with people who you like the smell of.
Abdul is grimacing, I think would be the word to describe his face.
The point that I was going to make, though, was that while we might be attracted to friends who smell the same as we do, studies do show that actually we might be attracted to people who smell differently from us. And there was a study that I found really interesting, reported by Time magazine, that said that straight women preferred the body odor of straight men whose immune systems were different enough that any offspring would have healthy immune systems, which suggests that there's almost like an evolutionary factor in smells that we're attracted to and potentially could help us create children that are stronger and are able to withstand infectious disease, which is, throughout history has been one of the greatest threats to humanity.
This feels almost like a pre-pandemic experiment in a way. I mean, I've never met any of you three, so I've got no idea what you smell like. And I wonder, Abdul, whether this is one of the disconnects that people feel with working over Zoom, etc., is that actually you don't have that physical feeling. It's not just about being in a room with someone. Maybe subliminally smells part of it as well. I don't know what you smell like.
This is an awesome thing. I think that you're lucky you don't have to work with me because I'm from the Middle East. We have very, very distinctive body odor. And I think this is what...
I imagine, Abdul, that you are saffron and rose petals, no?
Cinnamon and sugar, yeah. But to get back to Emma, I think this is a very interesting, to Kate, when she said that there's a dating service that's based off smells. Pretty much the only dating thing that we have in Syria or the Middle East is through our mother. So you just tell your mom what kind of woman you want. And if the smell is good, then it's all good. Smells, looks, family, background, all good. But I've never heard of smells, and I'm not really a fan of it. It smells fishy.
Okay, I feel we've reached a natural break on this story, but I'm aware, Emma, I should come back to you for a second contribution on this. I've no idea what you'd like to say. I might just say Emma and let you say something. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, here goes. Emma.
So there was a couple of interesting things in the research that I was doing around Kate's story. One was in Scientific American, which said that as part of this research, they had a team of designated smellers who tested scent similarity and ranked them in things such as intensity and pleasantness, which do seem quite, subjective. So the idea that apparently these things can be ranked. But there was also an interesting thing in an article. US News spoke to Valentina Palmer, a researcher at Monell Chemical Senses Center in Philadelphia, who reviewed these findings. And they talked about how smell is used in other sort of areas of scientific research. For example, when children with autism are exposed to the scent of their mother, they are better able to communicate and imitate the actions of others. So while this story, obviously, it's a fun story and it's been quite a lot more fun for me to talk about than the previous story. It's a lot less contentious. The use of smell in research is an overlooked factor, and I think that from this small, slightly odd study, I think there are some interesting, ideas to be taken, and it's interesting to see where it'll go next.
Yeah, where could it go next, Kate? What does this story mean?
Well, yeah, just to follow on from what Emma said, I think COVID has really put a stopper in these kinds of experiments because obviously they require people coming really up close and personal and sniffing each other, which in the age of social distancing hasn't really been appropriate. But I do think as we kind of enter the kind of post-pandemic stage, if you can call it that, who knows what it is these days, we might now see a return to more studies and more research carried out into smell. But
so what? What does it mean? I mean, what do we do with this information?
I suppose we might look into what it tells us about human nature, whether there's a kind of animalistic instinct to us trying to partner up or band together with people who smell similarly to us, and what that means for us as a society. Smell is a really social sense, and kind of understanding more about smell and why we're attracted to certain smells and dislike other smells can help us kind of understand more about how and why we interact with people and tell us things about society that we didn't understand properly before.
Okay. Abdul, you're up next after this. Abdul, you're finishing off the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
After a night out, the data of an entire city is on the rocks.
Japanese telecommunications giant NTT has announced that it will allow 30,000 employees to work fully remotely. Its new system will treat attendance as a business trip. Employees will be allowed to live and commute from anywhere in Japan, even by air. The move comes as an increasing number of companies are asking workers to return to the office as COVID-19 infections decrease in Japan. NTT hopes to attract and retain talented workers with the new system.
Nippon TV there reporting on Japanese telecommunication giant NTT's decision to pull the plug on office life completely. What's happened this week, Abdul, to make you think they've got the right idea?
So going back to the office hasn't been really good in Japan, especially for one IT company in Osaka, where an IT guy who works in a company responsible for finding out who's eligible for tax exemption in the city of almost 500,000 people. After work, the IT guy decided to go for a night out because I think of pressure of work, of life in Japan as we all know it. And then he had a memory stick on him in his bag with the data of the entire city stored on it, encrypted, of course.
What data are we talking about?
So we're talking about names, addresses, birth dates, and sensitive information for tax exemption.
For the whole city. And he had that on a flash drive in his bag, and then he went for a drink. And then what happened to the bag?
In his bag, straight out of the office, to the booze. After a couple of drinks, the guy passed out on the street. And then when he woke up, he didn't find his bag or the memory stick. And the company really apologized for that and said that the data has not been breached or leaked. But eventually, after a couple of days of search, they have found the bag and found that the memory stick has not been hacked, which was really surprising.
But not before having 30,000 calls in one day from angry customers anxious about the loss of their personal data. And that's the story, isn't it? People expect their data to be better looked after than being left in a bag drunkenly on the street.
Well, this is Japan we're talking about, so they must have been very polite phone calls. But this has happened before. A couple of years ago, almost 5 million people's data was leaked as well. In England, we had this thing in 2018. The data of 500,000 customers of British Airways was leaked. And British Airways was fined $27 million and had to settle down this with the customers. So this is not a new thing.
And Kate, Japan is surprisingly notorious for its poor cybersecurity, isn't it?
Yeah, I was quite surprised to learn that, because obviously it has this reputation of being a really technological superpower, especially in things like robotics and computing. But yeah, it has a really poor reputation for its cybersecurity. And I found it funny to learn that in 2018, the new minister in Japan, who was tasked with overseeing the country's cybersecurity strategy, admitted to lawmakers and the public on TV that he'd never used a computer. And he also expressed confusion over what a USB flash drive is. And in 2021, the IISS, which is a British think tank, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, they analysed 15 global powers in the cyber domain and ranked them in terms of their capabilities in various categories. And Japan was found to have serious weaknesses in its cyber capabilities.
Do you think, Emma, people take data security seriously enough in this country? I mean, in your experience working for various employers, have you seen sensitive information lying around?
Yeah, I think that there is still this sort of lax attitude with people's personal data. And in this individual case, the worker was allowed to sort of take this data home and work on it under certain circumstances, but those circumstances weren't to put all the data on a USB and then go to the pub. I think there is still a certain amount of laxity when it comes to looking after people's personal data. I mean, you look at sort of the breakdown of what this information was. I mean, on one hand, it is kind of funny that a guy goes to the pub, loses a USB stick, and it has everyone, and it has all this important information on it. But the fact is, it had basic information for all 460,000 citizens of Amagasaki. It had tax information for 360,000 of them, account information for 86,000 households receiving welfare benefits, child supports, or both. It's a pretty shocking state of laxity and sort of lack of care regarding people's personal information. And it is something that, we do hear this. Yeah.
Yes, but realistically, Abdul, how likely is it that someone who wants to get hold of this information for nefarious purposes is going to be scanning through the rucksacks of drunk people on the streets of Osaka in case there's an encrypted flash drive in there with that information on it? I mean, isn't it just a sort of scary, relatable, physical manifestation of what we're all doing all the time by uploading all our documents and data to the cloud? Like, if you're really serious about hacking into people's information, it's all up there anyway, isn't it?
It's very unlikely to happen, especially if you're living in England and most likely working for a company that you have Slack on your phone and you have the channel with everyone who works there and a lot of information. And if you're going out on a night out, or you're talking on the phone, walking in the streets of London, your phone might be snitched out of your hand, which has happened to a lot of us, including me. I wouldn't really worry about someone going through Slack and thinking, okay, what are they going to talk about this week on the Week Unwrapped? Or
it's very highly prized data.
So I wouldn't really worry about that. But of course, people would worry about their credit card numbers, social security numbers, addresses, and things like this, even if it's highly unlikely to happen. But, once the story is out there, I think, and it becomes a story and headline, then if the guy who's found this decides or knows or was aware of having in the position of such a valuable item, might sell it somewhere.
Yes, but the point I'm making, Kate, is it's in the cloud anyway for our convenience because we move from location to location. We've all said yes to all the cookies, haven't we, in the last 3 years? And now various different corporations know all about me, what I'm doing, and all my personal information.
Yeah, that's true, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we should be relaxed about things, especially in this time of so many people working from home. And over the pandemic, we've seen a huge increase in things like fraudulent emails and spam and phishing attempts, with figures trying to kind of hack in to people's corporate emails and gain access to them for various purposes like blackmail. So because this is on the rise, we need to be extra vigilant. And yes, a lot of information about us is available out there, but it doesn't mean that, because things are out there, we can relax in other ways. We still do have a duty, especially to our companies as well, to protect that data as much as we can.
Emma, what's the most valuable or precious thing that you've ever lost or left behind somewhere?
I can't think of any specific example, but to be honest, this story really sort of sent chills down my spine because I'm the person who has lost thousands of pounds worth of umbrellas and sunglasses and earrings and stuff down the years. I am constantly misplacing stuff. All these various accessories that I've lost down the years have probably add up to, a deposit on a house or something. So, I can imagine like the poor guy sort of going through his bag in the morning with a bit of a sore head and suddenly realizing that this incredibly important flash drive is missing. It's the sort of thing that makes me doubly careful about these kind of things. Fortunately, I've not lost anything this valuable or this, sensitive yet.
Kate?
Yeah, I agree with Emma. The idea of kind of being this guy and waking up and realizing what you've done, I can't even think about it. It makes me feel sick. Genuinely worst nightmare. But I'm one of those people that actually doesn't really lose much. I don't know why that is, but sorry, I know I am showing off. I do have a boyfriend though who loses everything, and I think that's probably why I don't lose things, because otherwise we couldn't be together. But he only this morning has messaged me about 12 times saying he can't find his wallet anywhere, thinks he left it in Tesco. So I suppose by extension I lose things through him.
Abdul, you're a trustworthy person, aren't you? We could trust you with all our data. You don't lose things.
I've only lost one thing, one very precious thing. 1998. I was in Syria. My brother got a scholarship to go to England for 6 months. Came back. He brought me a pair of Nike shoes. Back then in Syria, we didn't have any. We had only one brand of shoes, and it's Chinese. And it sucks. It gives you bad smell. I think that's why I'm traumatized from smelling. And then I went to the beach, and it was stolen there. I lost it there because I put it on the sand. I went to swim. And that was a lesson for me. And since then, I have never lost anything.
But surely if everyone's wearing the same shoes, you can find the guy who stole it because he's the one wearing the Nikes, no?
Well, I couldn't find him. I wear glasses, so.
Well, at least you haven't lost those. Luckily, we use cloud computing here, so we will not lose today's recording. It'll be there for all eternity, you lucky people. My thanks to Emma, Abdul and Kate. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. Remember too to check out our sister show from the week, The Overview. I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby. The producer Isabelle Boujard at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.